you're here. Yeah, we're so glad you're here. Oh, we're so glad to be together in unity. We're so glad.
Your inbox or come knocking on your door. We just ask because we want to know who you are, what matters to you, and how we can support you on your journey. That's it. So for this morning, settle in, breathe, and we always like to say welcome home. All right.
Okay, so today, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah. That's better. All right. Now maybe you can hear me too good. You can turn me back down now. So last week we talked about the 1950s and the spiritual message that was relayed through the 50s and what people were experiencing. Every decade has a wound, a collective ache, a question that the culture is trying to answer. In the 1950s, it was about conformity. Just trying to get everybody together. And the pressure to fit within a particular way of being. And unfortunately, when we do that, we hide our true, authentic self, right? And just to pretend that everything is fine. How many understand that fine is not really an answer to the question of how are you? Fine. I mean, it could be, but most usually it's not because we're programmed to say, I'm fine, even when we're not. So to pretend that everything was fine while the soul felt like it was suffocating. See? So by the 1960s, it just, everything came to a head. And the dominant longing of the decade was authenticity, truth, experience, and freedom. So the generation that came of age in the 60s looked at their parents' world, the suburbs, the suits, the Cold War fears, the unspoken rules, and they said, this cannot be all there is. Have you ever asked that question? Is this all there is? So they wanted realness, not performance. They wanted freedom, not conformity. They wanted connection instead of isolation. They wanted experience rather than doctrine. They wanted justice and not complacency. Take a breath. Abraham Maslow, the psychologist who created the hierarchy of needs, he understood this. Once your basic needs are met, people naturally begin to ask, is this all there is? So if you're asking that today, you're asking the right question. How many know there's always more? Say it with me. There's always more. And so by the 1960s, America had enough prosperity to ask this question. And the answer comes back, no, there is more, right? There's always more.
So let's look at how the culture responded to this longing through television, books, movies, and the music that actually wound up becoming the country's scripture, more or less. In the 1950s, you recall, we may have said last week that the television showed us what life should be like. We had Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, The Perfect Family, The Perfect Lawn, The Perfect Smile, and all the little troubles were taken care of in a half-hour time span. By the 1960s, television started showing us what life actually was, because for the first time, war was broadcast in living rooms across the country. The Vietnam War was broadcast into every living room every night, and Americans watched body counts on the evening news. They saw burning villages, fleeing children, and soldiers in jungles that in a place they couldn't even find on the map. Didn't even know where Vietnam was. It would be referred to as the first living room war, and it really changed everything. We also, in the 60s, through the television, had the civil rights movement that was being televised. Americans were watching peaceful marches, and they were watching peaceful marchers being beaten by police in Selma. They watched dogs and fire hoses being turned on children in Birmingham. They watched Dr. King speak, not in a church, but on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. They watched all of this on a screen in their living rooms for the very first time. And finally, they watched in horror the assassinations of a president, John Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and finally Robert Kennedy. These were all televised, assassinations televised. A generation watched its leaders die, live on a screen. So television stopped being that window into the perfect world, and it became really a mirror showing America its own violence, its own divisions, its own grief, much like today. So the spiritual lesson in that is to understand that truth is sometimes uncomfortable, but you can't heal what you refuse to look at, what you refuse to see. So it was important for us to be able to see these things.
So there was a lot of duality, a lot of the dichotomy. The movies of the 1960s revealed a lot about what was going on. Because a lot of times the movies will reflect back to us what the culture is thinking, where we're at, where our beliefs are. And one of the movies was Dr. Strangelove, 1964. Stanley Kubrick's black comedy about nuclear annihilation. The world could end because of human stupidity. Mm-hmm. And we could laugh at it or we could cry. All right. The Graduate. Have you ever seen that? Dustin Hoffman plays a young man who has no idea what he wants. He's alienated, directionless, and sleeping with his parents' friend. It was the first film that said growing up isn't a happy story. Sometimes it's a confusing one, right? And then there was the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967, with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. They play parents whose daughter brings home a black fiance. And in those days, that was controversial. It was brave. And it asked, can love cross the lines that we've drawn? Easy Rider. Two bikers search for America and find not much. They were looking for freedom. They experienced drugs, sex, and a violent ending. It was the counterculture movie, and it showed that the revolution was way more complicated than anyone wanted to admit, right? So what was the spiritual lesson here? The old stories weren't working anymore. How many have come to that place in your life right now? The old stories are not working anymore, right? And so the new stories are yet to be written. How many are writing a new story, a new book, a new chapter, a new experience, living a new life, you know? And that was the hope of the 1960s.
Yeah. Speaking of books, the 1960s brought us some extraordinary books, books that gave us a language for the longing that it was experiencing. There was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, published in 1962. And this book was about pesticides. And here we are still dealing with pesticides. But it was really about something deeper. The earth is sacred. We're poisoning our home. And if we poison the earth, we poison ourselves, she said. It gave birth to the environmental movement, a movement that asked, how do we love the earth as we love ourselves? There was a lot of turning toward the earth. Betty Friedan wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique.
Ooh.
She called it The Problem That Has No Name. It was the dissatisfaction of millions of women trapped in domestic roles. She gave voice to a silence that had been enforced for generations. Remember those moms on Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, trotting around the house, cleaning in their little dresses and their aprons, and right?
I don't remember that. Of course, I wasn't.
Read The
Well, never
Feminine
mind.
Mystique. The autobiography of Malcolm X. Now, this book was Malcolm X's story told with Alex Haley, and it was his journey from being in prison to becoming a prophet. So it was really about moving from anger to something more like grace. It was a spiritual autobiography about a man finding his soul. And then there was The Greening of America by Charles Reich. And this was done really 1970. It's right at the edge of the decade. But he argued that American consciousness was transforming. It was going from an old corporate consciousness to a new, open, loving consciousness. And he called it Consciousness 3. So what's the spiritual lesson in this? Well, books are not just information. They're actually invitations. Invitations to see things differently than the way you've always been seeing them. And when we see different, we become different.
And then there was the music
Aha.
of the 60s, which wasn't just entertainment. Basically, the music was a prayer. It was a prayer. Bob Dylan wrote, "The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind," right? How many cannonballs must fly before we decide that, hey, that's not a good thing, right? I'm not sure that's how the words go, but anyway.
I'm not sure either.
They asked questions that had no easy answers, and the times they are a-changing. And it was a warning and a promise. Dylan was a reluctant prophet of a generation that didn't want to be led, but couldn't stop following.
Yeah.
How many understand Jesus said that we are all like sheep, right? And sheep will just follow the loudest, noise. And it's a true thing. I read about sheep that if one sheep goes over the cliff, they all think, oh, that's what we're supposed to do now. And they'll all follow each other off the cliff. Isn't that amazing? So then there was the Beatles. All you need is love. That was a simple message. But how many know the answer is love, right? That's what the answer is. That's the very foundational, structure of this whole thing, right? And then they sang about Lucy in the sky with diamonds. I remember the first time I heard that song, I said, what is she doing in the sky? Wearing diamonds, But LSD, right? And that is the psychedelic journey, which we're kind of experiencing a lot of that today, People are imbibing, so to speak. But it was an invitation to look beyond the ordinary, to see beyond, the structure, to see beyond what is here now, and to realize that we got a ways to go, right? Mm-hmm. So by 1968, the Beatles were singing "Hey Jude," which was a song about comfort. I mean, we all need a little comfort, don't we? About being held when life falls apart, right? We all need that. We need to be able to comfort ourselves and to comfort each other. That was one of the messages, that came out of the 60s is we all need comfort. How many know that being comfortable is okay? If you're wearing shoes that are hurting your feet, I would recommend that you throw them away.
Give them away.
Or you give them away or circulate them. Find some shoes that feel good, right? Yeah. So Aretha Franklin had a great song.
R-E-S-P-C-T.
That's right. And she wasn't just talking about personal dignity. It was a declaration of her spiritual worth. How many know you have value and you have worth? right? I don't care what anybody's told you. You are valuable, you are precious, and you are a child of God, right? So her voice was gospel, but it wasn't in the church, it was out in the streets, you know? And then Sam Cooke told us that a change was going to come. Change is going to come. And he wrote this right after he was denied a hotel room because of his race. And it was a prayer. Weary, hopeful, certain. It's been a long, long time coming. But I know a change is going to come. Right? And Jimi Hendrix, his version of the Star-Spangled Banner, at Woodstock in 1969, sounded like bombs were falling, sirens wailing, and a nation tearing itself apart. And then somehow it resolved into the melody, a prayer for the country that he loved and the country that maybe had failed him in some way. So the spiritual lesson of music is that music speaks what words cannot. It goes where the soul goes, into the ache, the hope, the confusion, and the ecstasy, right? We know that music can speak to you in a way that nothing else can. Isn't that true?
Yeah. So we asked Chris if he would consider playing Jimi Hendrix's Star-Spangled Banner, and he flatly said no. So what was happening in the spiritual world in the 1960s? Well, Eastern spirituality arrived. In the 1960s, millions of Americans encountered Eastern spirituality for the very first time. Meditation, once considered something exotic and foreign, became something that you could learn in a weekend workshop. Wow. Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism no longer was seen as something that's over there, but they now saw it as how they could use it as a path to liberation. The Beatles went to India to study with the Maharishi Yogi. People saw that. And then there was Ram Dass, who was born Richard Alpert, and he had been a university professor who was fired for experimenting with Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. He went to India, he found a guru, and came back with a simple message. Do you remember what it was? Be here now. And that became the title of his book, Be Here Now, in 1971. And that became a handbook for spiritual seekers of the time. So people wanted a direct experience. What do you think they were looking for with all of the drugs? Escape and freedom, but they were looking for some kind of a direct experience. And some of them were finding it, yes? They were not looking for the inherited beliefs of their parents and their grandparents. They wanted to feel something. They wanted to feel the divine, not just believe in it. So unity teaches us that truth is universal. There's no religion higher than truth with a capital T. Unity's always believed this. But suddenly in the 1960s, it was like the world was finally catching up.
How many know that God is not a Christian? God is not a Baptist? God is not a unitic? God is not a Buddhist. The divine is. The divine is, right? So the 1960s saw the rise of the human potential movement. And as we said, we were talking about Abraham Maslow, who created the hierarchy of needs. He said human beings are always becoming, or always becoming. He believed in the idea of self-actualization, the process of becoming fully human. You know, we talk a lot around here about becoming spiritual, but what if becoming spiritual is really becoming fully human?
Mm.
I mean, no, we're not trying to get away from the body or the physical world. We want to inhabit it and to bring heaven into earth. That's what Jesus said. Pray this prayer. Thy will be done in earth as it is. Right? And so it's important. Carl Rogers, a psychologist at the time, taught that the deepest healing comes from unconditional, positive regard or focus. When someone truly accepts you, then you can grow. Right? But here's what I want to add to that. Don't wait for somebody else to accept you.
Mm-hmm.
Accept yourself. Right? Accept yourself as you are and then grow from there. Right? So there was something called EST, which was Earhart Seminars training, which was intense and confrontational and sometimes controversial. But it was asking, who are you when you stop believing your stories? Isn't that a great question to ask today? Who am I when I stop buying into the stories? Who am I really?
Mm-hmm.
And there was Silva mind control, taught that you could access deeper levels of consciousness through relaxation and visualization. It was prayer without the language of prayer,
Mm-hmm.
right? How many know there's all kinds of ways you can pray? All kinds of ways. The unity teaching is that the divine potential is within every person, everybody. And you are not broken. You are becoming. Right?
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. So what about unity? Well, as I said a moment ago, unity didn't have to reinvent itself in the 1960s. It already was what the 60s was looking for. The culture was finally asking the questions that unity had been answering for decades, from way back in the late 1800s. Silent unity, the prayer ministry, continued to grow. People were calling for prayer in record numbers. The culture was hungry for practical spiritual help. Unity literature flourished. Works by Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, H. Emily Cady, and Eric Butterworth found a much wider audience. And Lessons in Truth, Emily Cady's work, written in 1896, was still Unity's best-selling study book. Yeah. Eric Butterworth. We talked about him a little bit last week. He was the public face of Unity, minister in Detroit. And his message, God Within, Personal Transformation, Jesus as the Example, fit the spirit of the decade perfectly. His books, Discover the Power Within You and the others, there are many, reached thousands. And Maya Angelou studied to be a licensed Unity teacher while attending Butterworth's church. Bet you didn't know that. And what about James Dillett Freeman? Well, he was Unity's poet laureate. He wrote prayers and poems that reached millions. His poem, I Am There, traveled to the moon with Apollo 15. And Buzz Aldrin carried the prayer of protection to the moon. You know that prayer we do at the end of every service? He carried that to the moon in 1969. Yeah, so the world was changing in a positive way. And these ideas that Unity held were finally beginning to come to the forefront.
Yeah. And so it's important to remember that there's always the light and the shadow. Okay? When you go out in the light and you look behind you, what do you see? Hey, who are you? It's your shadow, right? And because we're honest people, we have to look at the shadow. How many understand that we can't push it away any longer? We can't suppress it any longer. We can't deny it any longer. We have to set it free. Every awakening has its excesses, right? It happens.
The pendulum swings.
The pendulum always swinging back and forth. Mm-hmm. And so privilege disguised as revolution. The hippies were largely white, middle class, and educated. They could drop out because someone else was paying the bills. Thanks, Mom and Dad. Native Americans, Black Americans, and poor whites couldn't afford to drop out. They were fighting for survival. There was sexual liberation without consent. The free love of the 1960s often meant that women's bodies were available, but without the language of consent or mutual respect. Drugs as an escape. Not every LSD trip was Woodstock. Many were terrifying. Many young people didn't come back from them. And at the end of the 60s were shadowed by Charles Manson, who used the language of counterculture, the love, freedom, and communal living to do horrific things. So there's always a shadow. So whenever there's light, there's a shadow. Mm-hmm. How many know that we need to allow whatever is hidden to come out into the light, to be revealed? That's why we're living in the age of disclosure. How many understand that everything's coming out? And you haven't seen anything yet. More is coming. More is coming. It's just a natural experience, right? It is a principle. It's like a volcano. You can only hold it for so long. Eventually, it's going to erupt. And when it does, all kinds of things are going to come out. So what are we going to have to do when we find out things that we don't want to find out? How many know we need to understand? We need to see with clear eyes and understanding. Sometimes we need to forgive. Sometimes we need to correct, right? There are things that need to happen. And that's what disclosure is all about. So I just added that extra there.
Yeah, you got that for free.
Yeah.
So I don't know how I missed this early on, but last week for the 50s, we talked about the television kind of being our touchstone that we were referencing to. And this week, it's the psychedelic poster. Now, I must admit, when I started going to look for psychedelic posters, it was like going down a rabbit hole, and it was really...
It was like being on an LSD trip.
Yeah.
Not that I've ever done that.
So you take the conformity and the boundaries of the 50s, and you contrast it with this. This is where we were at in the 60s. It looked like, whoo, right? The question that anchors our entire series is, where was the divine hiding in plain sight? You're going to find through the course of this series that these are going to sound kind of familiar about where the divine was hiding. The first place was in the music, same as last week. Dylan, the Beatles, Aretha, Jimi Hendrix, they weren't just entertainers. They were prophets. They were singing about a world that could be different. They were singing about something that was outside the boundaries that the 50s had constrained them to. They were saying, that back there, we're done with that. That's over. A new thing is coming about. And you can hear it if you listen closely. So you go back and revisit some of those songs from that era and kind of listen to them with a fresh ear, listening for how much they were singing about new ideas from the 50s. It's really quite interesting. So the unity teaching is that there is one presence and one power, and that power is good. And the music really was a declaration of that goodness that would ultimately win. They were seeing goodness would ultimately win.
Love wins, right?
Yeah.
So, but the divine was also hiding in the questioning. You know, in Unity, we like to say, we don't provide answers. We like to question people's answers, right? Because it's in the questioning of those answers that you begin to see what's really real, what's really true. What do you want? Do you want the truth? Do you want the truth? So the counterculture asked, is there more? And the question, even when it led to excess, was itself a sign of the divine. The soul wouldn't ask the question if the answer wasn't available.
Yeah.
Unity teaching. Longing is the beginning of prayer. Longing is the beginning of prayer. Sometimes we don't know what we want. But when we do, there's a longing, a desire for it, right? In the 1960s, didn't need to find God perfectly. They just needed to keep looking, keep searching, right? Say it with me, I will never give up. Right? That's important.
Yeah. And the question, is there more, is one we're still asking today. Because no matter what point you get to, no matter what point you evolve to, there is a natural thirst and hunger to experience something more. We're expansive beings. We're not meant to live in little boundaries, especially in our thinking.
That's right.
So the divine was also hiding in the activists' courage. Dr. King, the Freedom Riders, the students that were sitting at the lunch counters, they were being driven by love. They wanted justice for all. And it wasn't just a feeling, it was love as a commitment. They were committed. They would endure a beating, get up and go back and do it again tomorrow. Repeatedly, over and over. They had a willingness to risk everything for justice. Which one of those beatings was likely to kill them? But they got up every day and did it again. So Unity teaches that justice is love made visible. I like that. The activists were making the divine, which is unconditional love, visible in the world.
Yeah. Now, the divine was also hiding in the restlessness. The 60s were chaotic. But the chaos is not the absence of God. Chaos is the birth pangs of something new. The restlessness was the soul just saying, this is not enough. There must be more. We believe that the divine is always expanding. And how does the divine expand? Through each one of us, right? The divine is always becoming in and through us. And finally, the divine was hiding in the silence beneath all the noise. Yeah. The 1960s were loud. Protests, music, anger, joy, chaos. But underneath all of that noise, beneath the screaming, the chanting, the singing, the explosions, there was silence. And that silence was God. Jesus said, the kingdom is within you. And in the 60s, they discovered it through this, psychedelics, rock and roll, through all kinds of things. How many know that AA is a path to God if you let it? Right? Drugs can be a path to God if you use it in a positive way, if you want to turn your life around. Do you hear what I'm saying? Right? I've talked to a lot of people that said it was because they were an alcoholic and they came to the end of everything else, and they said there's got to be more, and they turned their lives over to a higher power, something higher than themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and they realized that they were powerless
Yeah.
over their own addiction.
Yeah.
And that's where the silence comes in. Because in that moment, God scores a touchdown. I mean, when you get silent, God gets loud. God comes through. Spirit comes through. And so the 60s taught us something very essential, that the divine is not found in running away. The divine is found in waking up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we're going to leave you with this. The 1950s taught us how to build a house. And then the 1960s came along and asked us what kind of soul was going to live in that house. One gave us structure and boundaries, and the other one sought meaning. What more is there? Why am I here? What is this all about? The questions. The spiritual journey is learning to hold both, because order, structure without freedom becomes rigidity. And what happens when things are rigid?
They break.
They can break. But freedom without some order becomes chaos. And sometimes in the chaos, nothing can get accomplished. So you need both. And so the 60s taught us that the divine is not afraid of our questions, because there were a lot of questions being asked. And the divine is not threatened by our restlessness, because there was a lot of restlessness. And the divine is not disappointed by our messiness, because there was a lot of messiness. We know that the divine is right here, right now. Be here now. In the music, in the questioning, in the courage, in the restlessness, in the mess, in the silence. The divine is always hiding in plain sight. So what will the culmination of the 60s bring to the era of the 1970s? Well, you'll have to come back next week and find out. But I guarantee you it was more than just Casey and the Sunshine Band's Shake Your Booty.
Even though that was an important part.
A very important part. And your handouts are on the front table if you'd like one.
All right. You feeling all right? How many understand that life is a gift? It's a gift. There were many gifts that were given in the 50s and in the 60s. There are gifts that are given to us right now, but we don't see them because, as Jesus would say, we don't have eyes to see. We need to develop those eyes to be able to see what's really happening, what's really going on. So we're going to turn down the lights, and Leah's going to do a song for us that came out of the 60s.
Mm-hmm. I see trees of green, red roses too. I away the dark, sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I will ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
I invite you now to go inside to that safe place inside yourself. There's always a shelter for you. Whenever there's a storm, there's always a shelter, a safe place inside yourself. Whatever's going on in your life, I invite you to find your center, that calm space inside, the quiet of the moment, the easy grace, the easy breath, and just breathe for just a moment. In Genesis, it said that the divine breathes into humanity the breath of life. And we've been breathing ever since. Perhaps we're breathing God, divinity, spirit. So just breathe for a moment. You'll feel your blood pressure coming down. And all of the things that you've been worried about, that you've been anxious over, you begin to realize that maybe they're not so big after all. Maybe there's a way forward. Maybe there's a way through this situation in my life. Maybe we can heal this relationship. Maybe we can heal our financial situation. There's potential to begin to write the things in your life. But sometimes you have to see it right first within yourself. We can't expect others to be at peace when we're not at peace within our own being. So whenever you're walking down the road and you forgot your peace, you left it somewhere, remember that you really can't leave it. It's still with you. It's inside. It's a part of you. It's in your breath. And so let it rise within you. spending moments in this peaceful place where anything is possible. Can you feel that? It doesn't take a lot of faith. Jesus said the faith of a mustard seed, which is pretty small. Just a little bit is all you need. A little dab will do you. A quote from the 60s. So just breathe. If you know of someone that you'd like to pray for in this moment, I invite you to whisper their name aloud at this time. We have loved ones who maybe are in pain, loved ones who are in the hospital, loved ones that are alienated. Maybe they live far away. Just bring them into this moment with you and hold them close. Your family, your friends, people that you know, bring them in close. And hold the space now, not only for yourself, but for them. And holding the space basically is just being in agreement with the truth, being in agreement with life, being in agreement with spirit. And just pull them into that. You might even want to whisper to them, I love you, I care about you, and I only want the best for you. Surround them with your prayers, with your love. Enfolded in the healing energy of the Holy Spirit. We're grateful for 250 years for our country, for our nation, for all the people who are a part, for all of those who are veterans, and for all of those who have given their life in some way, shape, or form, for those that made a difference, and for those of us that got to enjoy the changes. We're so grateful. We're grateful for our country, and we pray for our country, for its continued growth and understanding and wisdom and knowledge, and for the healing of all separation. That we just see that we're just one people. We all have the same needs, desires, and wants. We all have a longing for the good, for what's really, really important. And so we just wrap our arms around every person in our country, and we just extend our unconditional love to each and every one, and our gratitude for all. We're grateful for this planet. We're grateful for every nation, that we know that we are all brothers and sisters. So breathe now. And I invite you just to hold space for just a moment. So now, in the name of the Christ Spirit and all that is sacred and holy, so it is, so be it, and amen. All right. Let's reach and stretch. We're going to slowly turn the lights back on.